Welcome to Credentially's podcast, your HR healthcare kit.
Emily.
How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me. I'd love to start by hearing a little bit about your story, how you got to be in this position. It sounds like you're in quite an interesting space in the market, and one that, from what we see, is seeing great opportunity with the sort of rise in people needing that kind of care in the home that Visiting Angels can provide, but also time of difficulty, I'd say, in the staffing market. So I'd just love to hear a little bit about that. Anything you can share is very gratefully received.
Definitely. So I'm Emily Feugill. I'm the Director of Operations for Visiting Angels, which is a franchise company. So we have 2 franchises in New Hampshire, one in Auburn and one in Guilford. So I started in HR actually in the telecommunications field. So about 5 years ago, I moved into home care. And it's a completely different type of field, different type of candidates and employees and so forth, but the same, concepts, from human resources, recruiting, retention, things like that. We're finding right now in the home care, healthcare industry, the need for care, is extreme. Even before COVID, with the aging population in our state, the need for care in homes was increasing, and it's expected and projected to continue increasing in the next 5 years or so. And then with COVID, a lot more people are trying to stay out of nursing homes, facilities. So again, the need just continues to increase. So what we are finding, of course, it's difficult to hire. So not only do we want to continue hiring, but we need to focus on retention too. So we've been doing a lot of different things, really focusing on, trying to grow in sectors of the populations. The name of Visiting Angels is pretty well known, but really educating the communities because we may be able to get people from different industries, interested in home care and healthcare that way. So really just looking at different recruiting sources, making those connections, getting people in the door. We don't want to decrease our expectations for caregivers because, we still need to focus on quality care at all times. But it's really, focusing a little bit more on retention. We have a great training program, a great mentor program for our employees. And it's also showing just appreciation. Thank you cards, gift cards, little surprises, really go a long way, we're finding. So focusing, on our new staff, but also the current staff to keep them working.
There's a few points you touched on there that I think are really important, like quality. Often we see in the markets that we're established in that if you're trying to engage someone in home care, it's one of the most high trust positions that there is. If you've got someone that's coming in and taking care of a loved one, particularly someone that's vulnerable in their domestic environment, there's few things that require more trust than that. And so often in a job that unfortunately in the market that we're in does not pay as well as perhaps it should, you're competing against other employers, say, Walmart or Texaco or whoever really, that have a much easier onboarding process. These people aren't going to need a background check to work at a supermarket necessarily. And so that's one of the things that we see perpetually as a problem. And I'd love to talk to you. I think you hit the nail on the head with retention and appreciation and making sure that you take care of the good people that you have and keeping them. But how do you see that problem of finding people that are of sufficient quality and worthy of that task, which I think is a very noble one, in a market that's very difficult now to get those people?
And you really, hit the nail. We're competing, with the customer service industry, the food service industry. You see these companies increasing their starting rate of pay. You see a lot of times, sign-on bonuses and, huge amounts of money that they're giving people to get them through the door. And, I think one thing that we really are trying to focus on is, sharing that this is a rewarding career. It's not for somebody that just wants a paycheck, but really wants to make a difference in somebody's life. So really focusing on the career potential. We try our best to have, that growth opportunity. So if somebody wants to start as a caregiver, they can then become a caregiver mentor and work with some new caregivers joining the field, in a year or two. There's potential for an office position, a case manager position. So depending on where they're looking to grow, we want to support them, in any way possible. A lot of times too, people just are looking for the caregiver role because it is one that's flexible. It is one that, they know that they're, impacting somebody's life, and that's fine too. It's really just finding what motivates somebody and really going after that. And really, it's weeding out those candidates that, will jump ship the minute that they're offered something more. So it's really, educating them on what a caregiver is, and how important the role is, and, sharing that it's more of a career rather than a job.
That's very profound, isn't it? You want to find people that are motivated by the work as it is, which is to take care of someone that's vulnerable, that's needy, and to make an impact in their life, but also to say to them that this isn't the end of the road. There's ways that you could do this in a way that's more impactful. You could become more senior in this organization. You could, if you wish, take on more responsibility. And maybe that's not for everybody. Some people do enjoy that one-to-one personal care. I personally was an emergency physician, and I loved that role. It's very rewarding. It's very impactful. There's opportunities for management positions, but there's some people that just really like that one-to-one provision of care. But equally, I think what you said about retention, about sort of backing your best people and showing them that there's a way that they can grow in the organization is quite profound. So I'd love to hear any success stories you've had about that. It sounds like you've established quite a bit of experience. 5 years since you moved from telecommunications, right?
Yeah, and 5 years myself. So I find, and I tell people all the time that I should have moved into this industry. I should have joined Busy Angels years, before I actually did, because I enjoyed so much of the opportunities to grow, even from an office perspective, is really substantial. I think just, it's also sharing with employees that we're here for them. We have a lot of applicants at times where they may decline our offer, go work for somebody else, and then a few months later they are actually calling us back because they realize that the job that they took wasn't for them, and they feel that it would be a bit better fit to be with Busy Angels and be a caregiver. We also have employees at times, unfortunately they may need to stop work to go care for a family member or something along those lines. But it's really just keeping those open doors, open lines of communication, showing that we appreciate, everything that they have done for us. And especially if they leave on good terms and have been great caregivers, we're more than willing to welcome them back. So we actually have a lot of people on staff, a good handful at least, that have actually been rehired, and returned to Busy Angels after, some time away.
Yeah, it's something I've seen sort of in the National Health Service in the UK, is that often people that are motivated to do caring work find themselves taking care of family members because it's sort of in the nature, in their temperament, particularly if they have caregiving responsibilities to a child or to an elderly relative. And so it sounds, very special that you can keep the door open for those people. But I imagine from a paperwork and bureaucracy perspective, it's quite challenging, right? Because you need to keep those people up to date and maybe re-credential them or complete the same pre-employment checks when they come back. What's that been like as a burden?
So it is a little administrative, of course, because we have certain compliance and training requirements. If somebody is, only going to be out for a month or two or, a short amount of time, we offer a leave of absence. And then, when they return, we just need to make sure that their credentials are up to date. If it's a situation where somebody, resigns, and they use Busy Angels, then when they're ready, and interested in reapplying, we take a look to see, one, were they in good standing and do we want to bring them back to the team? And two, where do they stand? Because we do have to go through the background checks and potentially, training them up again, things like that. So it just all depends on the amount of time that they've been out of work as well. So there is a cost, of course. However, we find, sometimes it's beneficial to invest in, that rehire, because we're investing, in a new applicant too, and we already know what kind of performance, they're able to provide.
Yeah, that's it. And I suppose that removes a lot of the sort of potential risk. You've got a good carer and for whatever reason they had to take time out, and you can bring them back compared to bringing in a completely new applicant off the street that may be impressive on paper, but really until you've had the chance to evaluate them in a caregiving scenario, it's hard to tell, I think, sometimes, even with sort of structured interviews, even with sort of evidence of their professional clinical skills, until you really have seen that person with a client, with a patient, it's hard to know whether or not they'll be impactful in the way that visiting agents is looking to achieve. So I think that's interesting. I mean, you mentioned sort of the cost and the time. I'd love to hear sort of a ballpark of, roughly as you see it, how long it takes you to get someone from maybe clicking on a job ad or being vaguely interested to sort of working with one of your clients.
Yeah, so that's a great question because I know it varies so much, company to company. For visiting angels, I'm primarily focused on, recruiting, bringing people on board and so forth. So I spend a lot of my time, reviewing the applicants, reaching out to them, as soon as possible. One thing that we really, are proud of being able to do is reaching and making that contact right away, because if somebody applies online or, shows interest, if we can get them within the first, 30 minutes to an hour, we're essentially more likely to actually get in contact with them. We have a lot of people that, have reached out to us, but then, aren't returning our phone calls afterwards. So we want to, really try to get their attention right away and, get them in the door for an interview as soon as possible if they seem like a viable candidate. We try to make offers as quickly as possible if we know that they're, credible, and, if we have a good feeling about them and want them on our team. With the background checks, we are also required to do, some medical, checks, physicals, things like that. So it really depends on how quickly they're, motivated to get that done too. So that kind of dictates how quickly we move on our end. But we've seen people apply, interview, and start, within a week or two. But then, for others, if they, aren't as quick to get stuff done, it may be, 2 or 3 weeks. So it really just depends on the candidate as well.
I mean, that's superb. Firstly, contacting people within 30 minutes to an hour is sort of best in class. So well done. And through the background checks that you must have to do is extremely impressive. So what kind of volume are you doing roughly? Feel free to sort of give a range, but are we talking sort of 10 candidates a month, 100, 1,000?
Yeah, so we have 2 franchises. One is significantly larger than the other. So I'd say roughly we probably speak to at least 175, 200, give or take, like some months and maybe, 140, 150. And a lot of those, may be, that we're trying to get in touch with them and then we don't hear back. So it's, not necessarily that, these are all the people that we're connecting with and bringing them in and so forth. Some people, I find may apply to a job, we reach out once or twice and then, we don't hear from them, but then next month they may actually, return our call. So, we don't want to spend too much time trying to, get in touch with somebody that's not being responsive to us, because likewise, if we're, bringing them on board of reaching out about shifts and potential clients and they're not returning our calls, it kind of gives us that first indicator of that risk. So we try to reach out, I'd say probably about 2 times, phone and email. And if we don't hear back from them, then we're not going to spend too much more time trying to connect.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a big investment, right? To get people, I don't want to say processed, but, through the checks that are required and through the training and to the point where you're happy to put them safely in front of a client. It's a lot of trust is involved both ways, I think. So yeah, you don't want to be chasing up people that you don't feel like you're pushing on an open door, right? But equally, I imagine people have circumstances that change and there will be some of those people that come back. But so 175 to 200 sort of contacts a month. And do you have an internal target for how many people you actually try and kind of get online and ready to sit with clients?
Yeah, and so it fluctuates, depending on the need for care. We're finding right now we actually have a wait list for potential clients. So our goal is to get as many quality candidates, hired. So we don't necessarily have, a certain number per month, for example. I always try to strive for at least, 5 to 10. Some months we have more, some we have less. So it just depends on the nature of, the business at the time.
I see. I mean, it's a good position to be in, I suppose, to have a wait list for clients, and kind of speaks to your reputation in the space. And as you say, I think there's a growing demand for that kind of domiciliary care and care in the home, given everything that's happened over the last 2 years and given the nature of the aging population. So I presume the business is growing. You mentioned it was a franchise. I'd love to hear any sort of the growth plans that you can share, if that's okay.
Yeah, and so we're definitely looking to grow, but we need to make sure it's manageable for our staff. We're looking right now currently to bring some care case managers on board, so increase, the office team. But again, with the job market and the job candidate pool being, a little competitive, it's definitely a challenge because we want to make sure it's the right fit, especially for that type of position. With COVID, we did take a little hit, with our clientele, caregivers, because a lot of our caregivers, had to, take time out of work to, be there for their children with remote learning, care for family members. A lot of our caregivers may be older at times too. So they, were of course concerned for their health. So we're definitely, regaining, and growing, and kind of surpassing where we were. And essentially it's really the sky's the limit. One of our franchises, we were the first in the state actually in New Hampshire. So we've been in business about 18 years total. So we're just, looking to really continue that good reputation and, making sure that we provide the quality care that people deserve.
Yeah. And I think there's always that tension between growth and quality, right? As in the reason that I presume you have pressure to grow, the reason that there's people that want to engage with your service is because of that reputation for quality. And unfortunately, that means sometimes it can be put a limit on your rate of growth, if you like. If you need to get good people, and it's a challenging labor market. And we hear this from all sectors in the US, domiciliary, primary care, secondary care. It's a very challenging environment to hire people at the moment. I'd love to just sort of ask a little bit about kind of the onboarding experience for your candidates. So sort of how do you manage that process? How do you take them through sort of the forms and the back and forth email and getting them sort of ready to work? Is there any tech that you use or services?
Yeah, we have an applicant tracking system that we use. So that, helps with posting our jobs, getting those applications through. We also use it for our onboarding forms, which is very helpful in, time saving for sure. If somebody, is not very tech savvy, we still have paper forms that they can fill out as well. But essentially, I try to keep in touch with them at least every week, or so, just to kind of see how they're coming along with their process, keep them posted on our progress as well. We, have them come in for orientation. So we make sure, all the paperwork gets done, things like that. They get some initial training. We set them up also for a shadow shift. So they actually get to go out with another caregiver just for, a couple hours to really see what the job entails and, understand, what's expected. So we're not just throwing them out and wishing them well. We want to make sure we support them. We also, with our mentoring program, have them touch base with their mentor, within the first week or so. So that right now is over the phone. So that's an agreed upon time to have a phone call. And it really just gives that additional support system, in addition to the office team, supporting them. So they're able to discuss different scenarios, ask different questions, best practices. So they get a lot of, support, from peers as well as, their, case managers and so forth.
It's remarkable. I mean, what you do for retention. So you alluded to kind of the thank you cards and the gifts, but the mentoring program and sort of the career progression plan, if you like, or showing people that they can grow in the organization it's very commendable. Again, talk to a lot of people in the space, and sounds like you're doing something quite special there. So that's exciting to hear.
And I think, from a business perspective, you just have to make that decision that, it is an investment. It's an investment for the mentor program. All the training that we do additional, dementia training, hospice training, things like that. And it's really, you're putting the money up front, if you will, and investing in people that may or may not, work out. But, at the same time, too, we want to get them to where they need to be, and be confident, that they're providing the best service, to maintain our reputation too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose from a sort of purely commercial or kind of operational and financial perspective, having that sort of low churn, having a consistent workforce that you've done the checks for, and obviously presumably have to manage their compliance and ensure that they stay up to date with training and things. But that's, from what we see, a much more economical way to run a business than having sort of a high churn, high recruitment, having to process all those new checks for new people. I'd love to know sort of what your churn rate is, because I imagine I'll be sort of similarly impressed with the way that you've been investing in retaining people.
Yeah, so unfortunately, we still have, as much as we do to retain and attract the right people, we do still have turnover. It ranges. We've been as low as 30-40%, and as high as 50-60% at times. So it just fluctuates. One thing that we're really focusing more on, I'd say, this year is bringing people in, training them up, supporting that and providing additional coaching and support, but at the same time too, evaluating them quicker to see if this truly is a good fit for them. Because, if it's not, then, we need to make those difficult decisions, and it's sometimes best to do that earlier rather than later.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, from your point of view and their point of view, right? So the quicker you can establish that, the fewer costs you incur as a business, and the sort of less of your time, your team's time is spent. But also for the candidate, I suppose, if it's not a good fit, then there's something else they should perhaps better be doing. So I'd love to know a little bit more about your team. Is it just you that's working on all of this, or do you have people working underneath you to help you with all of the admin?
Yeah, so right now, it's primarily, I do all like the recruiting stuff. We do have other staff members that are going into the field, really sharing the word, to attract, potential clients as well as caregivers. So it's really a team effort. Everybody's a recruiter, everybody's a marketer in this type of business. So it's really, making sure everybody's on board with that. I may be the one that handles, most of the applicant phone calls and, interviews and so forth, but I do have other team members that will help and jump in, if needed to. Depending on, the size of our office staff, we have had other individuals, taking on like the initial phone call, contacts and things like that. But at this current point, I, pretty much handle a lot of it myself.
You must be a busy lady.
Yeah, it's fun. It keeps me busy. It's interesting. Just all the different people that you speak with. A lot of people sometimes apply not realizing what type of job this is. So you're able to educate them and, share your experience with them as well.
In terms of making sure these people stay up to date, so, we see typically the sort of between 10 and 30 checks still have to be performed on someone that's providing some form of medical or domiciliary care, and most of those will expire, and often that's quite burdensome for an organization. So how do you approach that? Is it sort of a spreadsheet in an email situation, or is there some kind of automation you have for that?
Yeah, so we actually have, with our scheduling software, we have, the client information, we have all the schedules, housed in the software. And then from the staff and caregiver perspective, we have, all of their information housed. So we can quickly see, when their driver's license is due, when their annual training is due, things like that. And we actually use it in a way that we set different tasks and reminders. So I typically pull a monthly report, so I know who is coming due for their training, for example. But we, really are proactive as much as we can to ensure that, it gets scheduled when it needs to get scheduled. But we use those reminders and tasks as well, to help us kind of keep track of everything. And And we, we'll send emails, we'll make phone calls, any sort of, any form of communication really to keep people aware of, what's coming due, what's overdue, to be sure that everybody's on top of it.
Fantastic. And sort of on the books right now, how many people would you say you're responsible for compliance of?
So with our two franchises, I'd say we have roughly about 130, give or take, caregivers total.
Yes, that's a lot of emails a month and notifications and phone calls, I imagine.
And but at the same time too, those phone calls, it's a great way to check in, show that we're thinking about them, seeing how things are going too. So it's not just a phone call to, hey, this is due. It's, hey, how are things going? So it kind of gives us that dual opportunity to keep tabs on our employees.
Yeah, and I think that's important, isn't it? Because often that relationship that you build with them helps you place them with the next client potentially, or helps sort of learn more about what's motivating them. If people are trying to save for a holiday and so they're maybe willing to pick up extra shifts, or if they're sort of finding a certain type of work particularly rewarding or a certain type of work particularly stressful or burdensome, that kind of, not face-to-face, it's down the phone, but sort of that human connection I think is important, and I think can be lost if it becomes an endless process of just sort of chasing, hey, this is going to expire in 3 months. Have you booked on a course? Have you done X, Y, Z? So it's good to see that you're using the calls for that as well. I mean, what percentage would you say of the time that you spend engaging with caregivers is sort of building that relationship versus sort of doing the practicality? He's saying, hey, I need this form, I need this piece of paper.
I think so. One thing that we do, and this is, entire office wide. So every month we have, a task or a reminder to check in and just check in with them. So it's not a phone call about a shift. It's not a phone call about something that's coming due. So anybody in the office can, take lead, to make that connection. So, it really doesn't take too much time. It's really just having that meaningful conversation. I think it's important to show appreciation and empathy for our caregivers. It's not an easy job. It's a challenging job at times. So really just having that human connection can go a long way. And, with, the compliance piece of things, we may have, 10, 5 to 10 people a month, due for something. So it's not overly burdensome. It's, really just, making sure to manage it efficiently.
Fantastic. I mean, it sounds like you've sort of got a very nice mix of both sort of quality and human touch and efficiency that's quite rare. So be curious about sort of, you said you've been working for Visiting Angels or sort of in the home care sector for 5 years. How would you say that the recruitment environment has changed in that time?
That's a great question. I think a lot of times, when I first started, being a franchise business, the owners, we're doing a great job with everything. When I first started, one of my first, tasks essentially was to review applicant tracking systems because they hadn't been utilized before. So I know, from a technology standpoint, things have changed over time. I know one of the things that we evaluated was, the artificial intelligence, type of technology, texting features and things like that, so essentially somebody apply, let's say, instantly get that text message. We've decided not yet to move forward in that direction just because we're able to connect with them and contact them pretty quickly ourselves. But it's really just being open and flexible to the ever-changing landscape of the company and, of recruiting in general, because, as new things come about, we need to be open to at least discussing them and exploring them rather than just sticking to our normal, this is how we've always done it, this is how we're always going to do it, because, we may be missing out on potential candidates, at that.
I think that makes sense. And also, it sounds like you're prepared to go through a period of relatively explosive growth. And what we see often is that people kind of have this awareness that if they were to double the number of candidates that they needed to see a month, or double the number of people that they needed to place a month, then in terms of the human resources, if they're doing things manually, at least some of the things that can be automated, it's going to mean increasing that team, increasing that spend. And there's different, I suppose, requirements for a smaller organization versus a one that's growing exponentially. And we see people sometimes solve that with technology, but I think it's always important not to lose that human touch. So great job compared to what we see in the market. So
and I'd say, we definitely want to grow as an organization, but we're also, at that point where, is it about growth or is it about, maintaining, what we've built already? So, I think as a business strategically, we kind of go back and forth a little bit, but ideally, the more we grow, the more people we can care for, and I think that's our main goal, is to provide the quality care, for those, individuals needing it.
And that's what it's all about, I suppose. And if you guys are doing a great job and the need for that care is expanding, it's only right that sort of you should expand into that role. But yeah, there is always that tension, I think, between sort of capturing as much demand as you can versus maintaining the kind of core values, which is, as you say, entirely about patient care. So yeah, it's an interesting problem, but it sounds like you've got a good handle on it. So
yeah, it's interesting. We go back and forth quite a bit. I work very closely with the owners and directors, and it's nice to be able to have a voice at the table, and really have that impact, which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, the human capital of the business really is its entire resource, right? So it's good that you have that voice at the table. Because without that, they'd sort of be flying blind, I'd imagine. So I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I've been very grateful to speak with you. Brilliant. Well, Emily, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
And definitely just let me know how I can help.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And you have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Search Credentially for your current healthcare staffing insights.